Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War, and I am standing here with Bertram Hayes-Davis. And Mr. Davis, you have an interesting family connection. Can you tell us about it?
I am a great-great-grandson of Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America.
And we're here in Vicksburg, Mississippi, which of course has deep Davis roots. Tell us about that.
Jefferson Davis moved to Vicksburg in 1835 after the death of his first wife, Zachary Taylor's daughter. He moved here with his oldest brother, Joseph, on Davis Bend, and the Davis family actually had a residence or property here until the 1950s.
Wow. So that's a pretty strong connection. And now you've come back to this area. What brought you here?
God.
Yeah.
I can just say it was a series of events. We moved to Mississippi about 10 years ago. I moved down to Biloxi, Mississippi to run my great-great-grandfather's last home and presidential library. And from there I moved up to Vicksburg, Mississippi. This is his home, and we've just loved it. We think that we're doing a lot teaching history about Vicksburg and Mississippi and Jefferson Davis in his hometown.
So what would you tell folks about your great-great-grandfather's legacy?
He didn't drop from the sky on February the 1861. He was 52 years old, and people understand that one sentence in a history book, but in his reference, he did a lot for this country. He went to West Point, he served in the Army for 8 years, he married Zachary Taylor's daughter who would pass away, he would go in the War of 1847, he went to the United States House of Representatives for one term, he was successful in getting the Smithsonian Institution started. He would also be Secretary of War under Franklin Pierce for 4 years. That would be from 1853 to 1857, and another senator before he was president of the Confederacy.
Now, that's a pretty incredible record by any standard. When he becomes president of the Confederacy, how do you deal with that as part of that legacy?
You know, we teach history. The history is, this is the entire story of Jefferson Davis. He didn't want the job. He was picked for the job. He was actually at his home down about 12 miles south of here when the telegram arrives. But it was his last opportunity to serve his country. You notice in this history, he never did anything for himself. He's always doing people for constituencies or electors or society. So he did that all of his life, and this was his last opportunity.
And he doesn't just disappear when the war's over. He lives to a ripe old age. He
does. He actually tries to escape. He's thrown in jail for 2 years. Finally has bail of $100,000. But people like Horace Greeley and Cornelius Vanderbilt sign his jail warrant. He goes on from there. He's going to live in Memphis, Tennessee, where his only daughter who gets marries a guy named Joel Addison Hayes. Jefferson and Verena had 6 kids, but all 4 boys died before 21, and only one daughter got married, my great-grandmother. Yeah. He's going to end up in Biloxi, Mississippi, and he's going to come up here in 1889 to look at his property, get pneumonia, and die in New Orleans in 1889.
So, as his direct descendant, the only one in the family with the Davis name still attached to it, Hayes and Davis names, as I recall, what are some of the things that you do to help educate people about your ancestry?
Well, the first thing I do is tell them that they have to look at the entire picture. Then I tell them, you know, I had to learn it myself. I didn't just read the books and made all the offers. I traveled everywhere that Davis was. So I stand here in this ballroom of Duff Green, or I walk the streets of Vicksburg, or I go to Montgomery, Alabama, Washington, D.C., wherever I go, that's where he was. And I try to feel exactly what it was, hear the stories, but also create my own idea of what he was thinking.
I understand, too, that you're also friends with other descendants, like, for instance, Grant descendants.
We have Grant descendants, we have Jeb Stuart descendants, we have lots of presidential descendants that we've met through the years, so we're very proud of that.
And Dred Scott?
And Dred Scott, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. So what would you recommend as a final bit of advice as people are exploring history and they're trying to navigate through some of these complexities?
I think when people see something that tricks them or envisions their imagination, stimulates them, who is that person? Take another look. In other words, dive into it. One of the first books I read was Robert Lindbergh, and I read We. And I don't know if anybody, you know, he's a complex man, but to read that story, I was infatuated by all the stories that got to be to the spirit of St. Louis. The moment that we know about him, but there's the story before that. I think that that's what I encourage people to do.
Bertrand, it's a pleasure to talk with you today. Thanks for taking some time with us.
Thank you very much.
For Emerging Civil War, I'm Chris Mackowski. We will see you online and on the battlefield.